Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here with us today. Today, I am joined by Dalia Kinsey. She is the author of Decolonizing Wellness, a QT BIPOC-centered guide to escape the diet trap, heal your self-image, and achieve body liberation. Dalia Kinsey is a registered dietitian, decolonized wellness coach, and the creator of the Body Liberation for All podcast. On a mission to spread joy, reduce suffering, QIA plus and BIPOC community, Dalia rejects diet culture and teaches people to use nutrition as a self-care and personal empowerment tool to counter the damage of systemic oppression. Dalia works at the intersection of holistic wellness and social justice, continually creating wellness tools and resources that center the most vulnerable, individuals that hold multiple marginalized identities. And before we get started, I just wanted to briefly touch on a couple of the other upcoming events at our bookstore. Tomorrow, February 10th at 2 p.m., we'll be hosting Christia Spears-Brown on this very YouTube channel to talk about her book, Unraveling Bias, How Prejudice Has Shaped Children for Generations and Why It's Time to Break the Cycle. And then this Saturday, February 12th at 6 p.m., we'll be hosting an in-store book signing with Sarah Langston to celebrate the release of her book, Images of America, Ogden, the Charles McCarthy Photographs. We'll be ending today's discussion with a 10 to 15 minute audience Q&A. So if you have any questions for Dalia, just drop them in the YouTube chat box and I'll make sure they get asked. And finally, if you enjoy this conversation, please consider supporting Dalia by buying her book, and please consider supporting our bookstore by buying it through us. And I'll leave links where you can do so down below. And without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Dalia.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. This is the first bookstore on my virtual book tour.
Oh, very exciting.
Sorry, that might be my connection. You froze for just a second.
Oh, great. I think we're back.
Okay.
Okay, beautiful. Well, if you could start by just maybe sharing an excerpt from the book, we'd love that.
Sure, I'd love to. This is from the chapter entitled Escaping the Diet Trap. Dieting is a tool of oppression. Don't get played. In her book, The Beauty Myth, Naomi Wolf explains that dieting is a tool of oppression, a powerful distractor from meaningful things. When we consider how much time assigned female at birth or AFAB women spend attempting to control their bodies, and what percentage of their disposable income they spend on the pursuit of the ever elusive beauty standard, it's nauseating. When we think about how rampant misogyny perpetuates wage inequality and gender-based violence, it really makes us question what we're doing when we're spending this much money supporting companies that continue to distract women from more critical issues like their own oppression. Your only value is physical beauty, that's in quotes, is a lie that tends to affect femme-identifying people more than others. But the effect is definitely extending to other gender identities as companies decide to exploit other people's vulnerable sense of self for profit as well. Why are we bankrolling organizations that don't support our full liberation? How can we go from one fad diet to another and not wonder who we are really doing it for? Is this really something we want to do for ourselves, or something we feel compelled to do, something we think we have to do because we've been brainwashed into believing that it's more important to be seen than anything else? Again, do we really want to participate in our own exploitation? Do we want to play a game that was originally set up to oppress people of color and femme-identifying people? Do we really want to adhere to the beauty standard at all? Stumbling there.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's such a great introduction to what you seek to do in this book. One of the things that you do so well is specifically naming and highlighting, the oppressive systems that are causing people to have these unhealthy relationships with their own bodies. And I was wondering if you could speak a little more to that.
It's ever present, this pressure to focus on the body as a measure of health and a measure of value and self-control. And this idea that you can look at someone and determine their health status and what their self-control is like just from glancing at them has been around, especially in the United States, for so long that it isn't even questioned a lot of times in healthcare settings. So if you go into the office and you happen to be in a slightly larger body, you can be guaranteed that no matter what you go in for, your fatness will serve as a distraction from you getting adequate treatment. And if on top of being in a larger body, you happen to be a person of color or you're a gender nonconforming person, you're even less likely to get any kind of meaningful care. And a lot of times visits to medical settings are anxiety provoking. And a lot of times I'm noticing that people who genuinely believe that these disparities we see in health outcomes and life expectancy are all about just lack of access to healthcare, it's overlooking the fact that not everyone gets the same treatment when they go into the office. But if you're used to having your marginalized identities derided so much, you may not have the capacity to advocate for yourself, and you may not even notice that it's something that is only happening to you because of that. You sometimes have to hear from someone who's not having the experience to know that you're being treated poorly. So only now it feels like we're reaching this critical mass where so many people are speaking out about how they're treated, and people, allies who are straight and white are also starting to listen. We're seeing how different our experiences are. And people have been living shoulder to shoulder, but in completely different worlds. So you have different health outcomes, not because of genetics or lifestyle choices, but because you are literally being subjected to completely different kinds of pressures every day. And then when you seek out care, you're getting a completely different experience on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you mentioned that it is important that we are starting to have these conversations and starting to name it, because yeah, people don't realize most of the time, unless they have some kind of affirmation, that it's not just them. Like, this is a real issue. Um,
That's exactly the reason why I felt it was so crucial to write a book specifically to QT BIPOC people, because of the need to be affirmed. Because this is part of how people operate. If you're the only one who sees something, even if it really is there, you are going to question its existence if everyone else in the room says they don't see it. So you really need for someone to reflect the reality of your experience back to you and to validate what you're saying, and also to even process grief and to be able to move through negative experiences. You have to face it and be able to be validated before you can start to recover from it. And it's so rare that you have your racialized experiences of stress validated. And it's very rare that people acknowledge that just because a law has changed, it doesn't mean someone's life has changed. So, yes, same-sex loving people can get married. Does that mean that it's safe for people to hold hands as they walk down the street in every city in the US? Absolutely not.
I'm wondering, kind of on the flip side of this, could you tell me a little bit about what you think are good indicators of health and what people should be looking for as they learn to check in with their bodies and establish a good communication and relationship with that?
If you feel like you are able to meet your own needs, that's huge. Do you feel like you're able to nourish yourself with the food that you have access to? Do you feel like you have enough time to get adequate rest? Do you have what you need to take care of yourself. And there's a lot of people that without visiting the doctor, they can tell you they just don't. Maybe air pollution's an issue in their area and they literally can't get away from it. Maybe all of the stores that are near them only sell just snacks and there are no grocery stores. Some of us know that there's all these needs we have that aren't being met. But then there are other needs that are all often glossed over that a lot of people don't have any issue with, like having the support of a loving family. So a lot of people, if you meet the expectations that your parents had for their child, that you would be just like them and think the things that they think and reflect their values back to them, while you may not know what it is emotionally to have to deal with the people that you thought loved you unconditionally, pushing you away. So do you have a support system? Do you have people that you can talk to when you're feeling frustrated that will just listen and hold space for you? Do you have a safe place to sleep at night? So if you have a partner that tends to be violent, you haven't got your basic needs for shelter covered. So a lot of these things are beyond what you may have individual control over. And what's important to look at is how much of my situation do I have control over? And can I prioritize the things that I could actually shift? Can I reach out to friends and chosen family more frequently when I'm feeling this distress and this isolation because my family won't keep in touch with me? And you often feel that sort of distress around the holidays. But if you don't reach out and let people know, there's no way for anyone to help you. And if you don't understand how damaging it is not to have a loving, supportive circle around you, you may not even know that it's crucial. And you'll be focused on other things like shrinking your body to feel better.
Yeah, it is such a complex and multifaceted issue. Like there are obviously a lot of factors at play. I'm sorry, could you talk a little bit about how you've structured the book? You know, you have these pauses for journaling and for the reader to reflect that I think is really great. And could you tell us a little bit about why you chose to structure the book the way you did?
I've loved self-help books for a really long time, but one thing that's always been frustrating to me is when an author presents something that maybe for somebody they're almost right there. So they really can just hear, release stress, forgive yourself. And they're like, oh, got it. The light has been switched, done, self-forgiven. But for other people, when you say, learn to give yourself some compassion, listen to and validate yourself, we don't know where to start. And I wanted to give everyone practical ways to get to the end goal, which is greater self-acceptance and happiness and comfort and control in your life, but without having to know how you're going to get there. Because one of the most useless things you can tell anyone is like, just don't worry about it. So a lot of times that's the advice you get when you say, I'm just so distressed. I saw this awful thing in the news. I'm so sick and tired of equity being inaccessible to so many people. Oh, well, just don't worry about it because you can't control it. That, like, who can just shut distress off like that? No one. So these exercises are ways for you to reduce your stress level and reconnect to what you really need. And most of these exercises are things that can naturally be built into your day, especially when it comes to using eating as a time to connect with yourself in a mindful way and to bring yourself back into your body, into the present tense. You don't have to do it perfectly every time, but usually at least 3 times a day, you're going to have an opportunity to practice that skill again and to try and bring yourself down from whatever heightened stress state you're in.
Yeah, thank you. And I think a lot of us do have complicated relationship with food. And I'm wondering, I mean, one of the things that I think is so toxic about diet culture is that it's completely unsustainable. You know, like you're inevitably going to fail because nobody can suddenly just change their entire diet and stick to it. And especially like it's not even like good in most cases, right? So do you have any advice for people who are looking to sustain this kind of like thought pattern or habit change where, you know, they're trying to build up a more positive relationship with food and a better relationship with their own body?
I think two crucial things is trying to surround yourself with like-minded people. It doesn't have to be someone who's way ahead of you when it comes to accepting their body or having a peaceful relationship with food. But it's helpful if it's people that are willing to commit to avoiding negative body talk and avoiding focusing obsessively on the body, even avoiding complimenting other people's physical appearance can be detrimental depending on what type of relationship that person has with their physical appearance. But it's really hard to address these issues with people who will have no idea what you're talking about because diet culture is everywhere. A lot of people don't question it. So if you're trying to explain this to somebody from, point A, that's going to require a lot of energy on your part, and you're trying to conserve energy to take care of yourself. And those two things don't really go together. So being selective about your association and selective about what types of conversations you will allow yourself to be exposed to. And when you can't control who you're around, really working those boundary setting muscles and understanding that no is a complete sentence. And you can tell somebody, I don't like talking about this. And you don't have to say anything after that. It will probably feel really awkward if you've been trained to prioritize everyone else's comfort above your own, which is almost everybody assigned female at birth. And then beyond that, maybe everybody raised in the South, most people. But if you just keep practicing it and understand that the better you feel, the better it is for everybody around you. And just forcing yourself not to say anything when you're actually getting really uncomfortable, it doesn't play out well if you look at the rest of your day around those coworkers or the rest of your week around them. So it really is better for everybody if you can set a boundary when you're starting to get uncomfortable. Because more than anything, I think the stress that breaks people away from trying to eat intuitively or in a more mindful way without looking at their weight is all of the outside input that you get from people that will make you question yourself. And then in between that and your own desire to be acceptable to other people, it can just be too much.
Yeah, thank you. I think that boundaries are such an important part of health, and it's such an overlooked part. And I really like what you said about no being a complete sentence.
And when you see other people do it, you may notice yourself even thinking like, oh, wow, that sounded kind of rude. But then you could question that even like, well, why? And isn't it their right to set that boundary and to make it safe for other people to set a boundary with you so you can create an atmosphere around you where consent is actually a thing in all areas of life?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the impact that mindfulness has on your practice, and how mindfulness techniques play into your book.
I really feel like it is the missing piece for stress management for a lot of us. But one of the challenges I used to come up against was thinking that it had to be a certain way. And like there was only one right way for me to meditate, or that I needed to have a clearly defined goal, or I wanted to be enlightened by a specific day. So learning to enjoy the actual experience of being present was the shift. And that's the focus in the book, is finding what brings you into the present moment and giving up this idea that there's one way to do it, because it's absolutely not true. Some people lose themselves in the moment during physical activity, whether that's running or dancing or laughing with friends. Sometimes it happens when people are eating, not thinking about the food because they're also socializing and they're not thinking about anything else. They're just completely present with you. So I wanted to present different ways that people can bring themselves back into their bodies. And a lot of times when you feel like you just can't get grounded, you need some quiet time, maybe deep breaths. That's pretty universal. But when it comes to actually developing a consistent practice, there's no way that can be the same for everyone.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned, that there's no one right way to do it, because that's something that I've struggled with when trying to practice meditation or anything really. It's just, like feeling like I'm not doing it the right way, and then giving up shortly after.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's. I like the emphasis that you place on people finding the connection to their body that feels best to them.
Yeah, I think that's a universal problem because everybody's conditioned to believe that there's just one way. And you think about, even if you just look back to your elementary school experience, when you first showed up on day one, you thought everything you did was wonderful, most likely, because that's what everybody was telling you at home. And then you get into the classroom and you get judged based on subjective things that are presented as though they're law and they're objective. Even things that are cultural norms, it's not a universal rule, but it feels universal when you're a kid and you're just trying to fit in and learn all the rules. Because I can look back now at so many instances where something was graded so harshly when it was clearly about the content and the adult having a different worldview. But I didn't understand that at the time. I just thought, oh, well, I can't write. Or I just, I didn't understand the chapter. Who knows? But in reality, people bring their biases with them everywhere they go. And people are constantly projecting their views onto other people without questioning them or where they came from. And it's very rare that you see somebody hold back and say, well, that's the way I would do it. But actually, you got it done and that's fine too. I don't know if anyone has ever heard those words in a school setting, because basically in school, you're being trained for your life out in the world as someone who will be asked to follow other people's rules and guidelines and pretty much go with the flow for the rest of their lifetime. And very few institutions stress the importance of critical thinking and understanding that there's more than one way to do most things. And so much of what we believe to be fact is indeed subjective.
Yeah, absolutely. There is so much just systemic messaging, like from the very beginning of our lives. And I think that what you've done here is provided such a wonderful toolkit for individuals seeking to unlearn and unpack some of that damage. What do you think can be done on a systemic level to change the institutions themselves?
That's a big one, because right now it feels like until more than half of us want for things to change, things aren't going to change. Like in the news lately, you've seen how many people are on fire about critical race theory, which is essentially teaching what actually has occurred in this country, which would fill in a lot of gaps. I don't think I understood until 2020 how many people had no idea that Black people weren't just like moaning and groaning about what happened 400 years ago, that Black people are talking about nothing much has changed. Like you're still using people for free labor. You're still not giving people equal access to their rights as citizens. There's so many things that have not changed. But how would people know that if you live in an area where you don't have any people of color? And when you went to school, they acted like slavery happened thousands of years ago. And like some people decided to come here voluntarily. It's interesting online, you see people sharing what sorts of stories they were told about slavery, what sorts of stories they were told about the indigenous people that were living here when colonizers arrived. And it's so inaccurate. It would just blow your mind. Like pictures of people getting onto what looked like a cruise ship, Africans getting onto a cruise ship on their way to be trafficked. So of course people are confused. So if people don't even have any idea about what our history is as a nation, I don't know how long it's going to be before everyone catches up, because so many people cannot understand what we're saying because it does not match anything they've ever been told. And if all your teachers told you, like here in the South, slavery wasn't that bad. That's constantly the story. That's what I was told in elementary school and in middle school. I was told that it was Northern propaganda that people didn't treat their slaves well, that the slaves were like members of the family and they actually were better off enslaved than liberated. And I was born in 1981. This is what people were saying in school in the late 90s. So if that's what you've been told by people you trust, and then someone else tells you, like, actually, no, these are crimes against humanity. And why do we continue to call enslaved people slaves, continuing to erase their humanity? How can you catch up? How can you be willing to make changes when you have no idea what's actually happened? You're just coming in mid-story. Of course, you don't know what's going on, and you don't know why people are so heartbroken and so angry because you were told, you know, the slaves were freed and then everything was great and racism doesn't exist. So for systemic changes, I feel like the first point is start telling the truth and stop trying to remix history. But I don't know when that's going to happen. And then for other people to just find the area where you think you can make the most difference and just dig your heels in there. So it could be calling for changes in your own school. It could be supporting affinity groups in your company. It could be listening to and validating people when they explain that there's been a problem at work, making it safe for people to disagree with you. At this point, it feels like we have a lot more power on an individual level, but also keeping our eyes peeled for when there is something we can do on a political level. So if people are trying to restrict trans folks from being able to relieve themselves when they're away from the house, because imagine how much that changes your life if you always need to be reasonably close to a restroom you can use at some point during the day. So there's some people who would be asked to hold it for 8 hours. Think about what a problem that is and how much that reinforces the sense that like the world is not a safe place for you to be and what that does to you. So if there is someone trying to push through legislation that supports that type of discrimination against other citizens, then that is certainly an opportunity for us to support and make changes there whenever we see a law that is going to reinforce and support white supremacy culture or homophobia or transphobia. But as far as really seeing massive changes in our lifetime, I don't know that it's going to happen, which sounds pretty negative, but you know, as you get older, the more cynical you get. But that's why I felt so called to put this book out now, because I'm like, we need this now. People are dying before other people now, waiting for things to be fair, waiting for people in this country to recognize that they're humans. We can't wait anymore. We have to take care of ourselves and live our lives with dignity and joy right now as we do these other things, not waiting for everything to be all right before we start prioritizing our own care and happiness.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a fantastic answer. And yeah, no, definitely a broad, sweeping question that does not have just one answer. So I appreciate that. Um, I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about the process of, writing this book, getting it published? How long did it take you to finish from conception to publication, and what did that look like?
When I think about that, I feel like this book has been trying to write itself for at least 25 years. But just in my head, these themes were always coming up, but we were living in a different time. And typically, when I would bring up these concerns or observations, it would be met with gaslighting. So I didn't really feel clear on I want to create the tool I needed when I was younger and a tool that people can use right now to move forward until 2020. George Floyd's murder was a catalyst, not just because of the murder, because honestly, that has been happening since I was a kid. I was trained from very small to be aware that the police are dangerous and you have to do everything you can to get out of a traffic stop alive. Like that was my reality from elementary school. So that part wasn't new. What was new was social media and the pandemic at the same time. So I am a elder millennial. So yes, I was still using social media a lot, but not like a Gen Z person would. But the pandemic had me online like all the time. So whereas in the past, I probably missed people's wackadoo rants, but not this time. So I got to see how many people in my own social circle, close friends, colleagues, didn't have anything to say when people were protesting the fact that Black people are being killed at outrageous rates and no one seems concerned. They didn't have anything to say. When property was damaged, well, then I start seeing the posts. Why can't we all just get along? Why are we creating these divisions? And it made me wonder how these people ended up in my circle and how I ended up building a life in which people might be surprised if I said Black Lives Matter. Because so many people around me are convinced that racism doesn't exist if you follow all the rules. So a lot of people don't consider themselves to be racist, will accept individual people of color, and they may not consider themselves homophobic because they have like one gay nephew or something. But in reality, they are constantly acting against the well-being of those people in their lives on a larger scale, on a political scale. And it made me start thinking about what damage does it do to me to continually be exposed to these people, because the microaggressions are always there. And I felt like my stress levels could not be contained. I already was receiving treatment for an anxiety disorder before the pandemic and before that second wave of the civil rights movement. But then it just felt like I couldn't walk enough, I couldn't get enough sunshine, I couldn't take enough medication to feel okay. I was just, it was literally making me ill. Like my hair started falling out. It was a whole thing. And that's where it was coming from. And then I would go into some environments, professional environments, where no one was even addressing it. And they had advised other staff members, like, we don't talk about political things here. Well, that's cute for you. This is a political thing. But for me, this is my life, and I don't get to take days off from this. So to not address it, and to also not understand, with me working in public health, that you failing to address this is contributing to people's feeling ill right now and undermining their health and well-being. It's just so upsetting when you start to see it all come together. So that really was the catalyst, was all the silence and all of the space for mindfulness that the pandemic brought us, plus the second wave of the civil rights movement that just like pushed me over the edge. Oh, and you did ask, what did it look like writing it? So I feel like I had the general questions I wanted to answer for myself and for other people. And I started with, what do I want people to know by the time they finish? And then I thought about embodiment practices, because that was one of the only things that really started to bring me relief, was dealing with the stress. Like I was trying to fend off an anxiety attack, even when it didn't feel like it was an anxiety attack coming, but just going all in with taking care of myself and nurturing myself. And that also meant I had almost no time for making space for things I used to make space for, like lots of emotional labor. So when people were concerned about my well-being who live in other parts of the country, and they kept calling to see if everything was okay, what can they do to be part of the solution? I didn't have the energy or the bandwidth for that. So just looking at other ways I could tell people how to protect themselves from this stress really made it clear what needed to be in the outline. And from there, I had an amazing writing coach who specifically works with women and femmes of color, or maybe actually just people of color. I met her in a group for non-binary and femmes. And she focuses on helping people get their story out, because so many people of color have been trained to make themselves small and not speak up. So I would sometimes feel like an anxiety attack coming on, just writing some things down and just knowing what types of reactions people have had to that type of honesty in the past. So it openly stating, I know someone treated me this way at work because of my race, or I know that other people didn't have to deal with hearing racial slurs at work, but if I would have made an issue about it, then I would be the problem, not the person who said it. Just writing down what I know to be facts would give me anxiety thinking about all the negative reactions that type of message would have, in real life based on previous experience. But she helped me work through that anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes complete sense, and it is a very divisive and tumultuous time that we're in right now, unfortunately. And a lot of people, like they don't want to admit or refuse to admit that systemic racism is still very much alive and impacting people today. Um, I think that you may have already kind of answered this, but what was the most challenging part of writing this book for you?
I think the biggest part really was the fear of being seen. And some of it is fear about safety, because white supremacists who self-identify as white supremacists have just gotten really bold recently. And so that's part of it. But more than anything, I think it's like ridicule and rejection from people that I trusted is what I was dreading the most. And also being fully out was something that felt like it was a little bit of a challenge, because I've never hidden my identities. But people assume that you're straight if you are partnered with a cis man. And people assume that you're femme if you look like me, even though that has never really been the case. And so this meant it's time to be fully out and embrace all the identities everywhere, to lead with them. But it also has served as a protection at the same time, because for some people, that's their signal to retreat. And those are people I don't want to be around anyway. So it's saving me emotional energy in the long run, but it just felt a little unsafe. And so that, I think, was really the most stressful part.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask, what has the reception been like from people that you know? Has anybody had their mind, widened? Have you encountered anybody who's started thinking about these issues differently?
So far, the only people who said, like, oh, this really changed my perspective on something was already receptive. So It remains to be seen. I am this week going to send out a notice in my neighborhood. I live in a 55 plus neighborhood with a lot of conservative people. So I think maybe that's going to be an interesting experience. I'm hoping I'll be opening hearts and minds, but at the same time, I really centered the people on the receiving end of the abuse. And I do think it's part of my own healing and my journey to interact a lot with the allies who are learning from reading the book. But my main mission was to help, folks like myself. So I've gotten amazing feedback already from that target. But another thing I also worried about, because no group is a monolith, was how heartbroken will I be when someone who I think is squarely within my target demo is like, I hate you, everything you say is wrong. So I've been trying not to focus too much on bracing myself for that. But that is one of the things about writing and being a content creator on any level, is that it doesn't pay to be too invested in how your work is received. Like, your job is to create the work, get the message out of your body, and then everybody else will receive it however they're meant to receive it. But that's easy to say and harder to, actually embody.
Well, we're going to open it up to audience questions. If anybody has anything, please drop it off in the YouTube chat box. But while we're waiting to see if we get questions from the audience, could you tell us a little bit more about some of the resources that you've included in your book?
Yeah, so I wanted to focus on, this has been very helpful across the board for body positivity and for other things related to body dysmorphia, is exposing yourself to more diversity, different types of bodies, different types of people, different types of storylines, because so often all we ever hear is what the dominant culture in the United States is saying. So I encourage people to listen to different podcasts by QTBIPOC creators, listen to the concerns that other marginalized groups are experiencing, instead of just always focusing on our own experience. Sometimes the best way to get out of your head and into the present is helping someone else, or thinking about how you could maybe help someone else. And some of the resources that I include in the book were really inspirational to me. So like Sonia Renee Taylor's book, The Body is Not an Apology, it was just so helpful to even realize that so many of us think of our body in that way, like something that we have to compensate for, because you knew it intuitively, but it might not have been until you saw it written and saw that, oh, other people feel this way too, that you realize it's not just me, there isn't something wrong with me, and oh, we didn't come up with this issue on our own. This was a reaction to societal messaging. And also, some of my favorite shows, I listen to Yellow Glitter, which is a podcast by an Asian cis gay man. And even though I'm clearly not the target of, I'm not the center, it's so beneficial to hear someone else's story. And it's also helpful to hear people talk the way they would talk when they think only people who get it are in the room. Because it's different from what you say when you think there's somebody here that you would have to explain things to. You just speak a different way. And I really like that content creator, his name is Stephen Wakabayashi, has created a sacred space for queer Asian people. And when I saw it, I knew that space was needed, even though I'm not Asian. I was like, oh, I really haven't seen other people creating safe spaces for queer Asian folks. So things like that are just really helpful for me to hear, that everybody's reaction to the stress that they're exposed to is totally valid, but people are still maintaining their dignity and living good lives all over the place under all kinds of circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to have other people to look to learn from, and also, yeah, to get that affirmation that you're not alone in your experiences, because so much of it is just gaslighting. So yeah, it's nice to get out of your own head a little bit and realize that you're not by yourself in anything. Um, what was the most rewarding part of writing this book for you?
It's absolutely been feeling like someone else out there will read it and be saved years of work. Because the point that I've gotten to now, it took so much therapy and so much coaching and so much ruminating and thinking that I was the problem instead of really understanding kind of the scope of where the stress and anxiety is coming from. Knowing that I'm going to help younger people and also people, who've come a lot further in life, maybe feel affirmed or validated for the first time. Because it's unfortunate, but depending on where you live, I mean, there's still plenty of people my age who have never had any of their racialized trauma validated. Some people are out in areas where they're isolated and they're dealing with the same stress that everyone around them is doing, plus this additional layer. So when I think about people understanding that you are precious and you're valuable, and you have a pre-existing condition, which is exposure to systemic oppression, knowing that some people are going to understand, oh, I need to treat myself with care, I need to handle myself with care, even though the messaging often is, we don't really have feelings that other people have, and we don't have or experience pain in the same way that other people do. Acknowledging that that's not true and giving yourself like all the love and sweetness, that lights me up thinking about that. And even though this is only day 2, I'd already heard from the people who got to screen the book and endorse it, what a validating experience it was to read it and how much they felt seen, and that they knew a lot of these exercises were going to continue to serve them. That made me feel really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think that allies also have a lot to learn from this book, but like you were saying, I think it's so great that the focus is QT BIPOC folks, and that there is this book for people who have been really shunned by the medical and the wellness industry, and who don't often, get that affirmation, get to be told that they can and should love themselves.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. The Are you working on any other projects at the moment?
Not yet. I was just saying today, I feel so scattered because just writing a book is a lot. However, I do keep feeling like I'm super drawn to the idea of an affirmation deck or another book centered on religious trauma that queer folks experience and how you can have a spiritual life on your own terms. That idea just keeps popping back up. But I've been stopping myself from starting another project because I'm one of those that loves to start projects so much more than finish them. I'm really trying to focus on seeing this end process through, because once the book is written, you're really not done. Now you need to focus on making sure someone actually gets to read it. So I'm putting it on my 2023 to-do list and just focusing on getting my message out right now and doing my virtual tour since, COVID.
Awesome. Well, in the last few minutes that we have, I was wondering if you could tell us just what do you hope that readers will take away from your book, or just any closing thoughts that you have for our audience?
That their worth is not debatable, that they don't have to spend even a minute proving their humanity to someone else. and that they're worth cherishing and treating with care. That's really what I hope everybody understands when they finish.
Hey, well, thank you so much. It was absolutely wonderful to chat with you. Congratulations on the release of your book. Good luck on your tour. And yes, folks in the audience, I'll be leaving links where you can buy the book. Please support Dalia if you enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, thank you again for
Thank
taking the time
you.
to do this.
Thanks for